Welcome everybody to this this session on using disruptors and unions in an age of digital disruption as part of Organise 2020. I'm John Wood. I'm the digital manager at the UC, working with our affiliate unions through our Digital Labs project, and I am really excited to be hosting this session with three great guests who've got a lot of insights to share with us. Before we get started in earnest, a few words about how we're going to run this session. We're going to hear from our expert guests. There's going to be a chance at the end to put questions to them, and you can do that with the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. Don't put your questions in the chat, please, or we'll likely lose track of them. And we'll try to get to as many questions as we can during the session. But if you want to comment or chat on anything you're hearing, please do add to the chat room. It's important to us that Organise 2020 is a safe space of solidarity and mutual respect, and we've got a kind of code of conduct participation in TUC events. My colleague Leanne is going to paste into the chat now, so please be mindful of that and of each other when you're commenting. And to let you know, we're going to be recording this session, and we'll try and make it available as a video as soon as possible afterwards, but we've got tens of hours of stuff to be editing through, so that may take us a little while. Thank you very much. So, on the topic at hand, I'm pleased to be able to introduce our speakers. Cansu Deniz Bayrak is a great person to have with us to talk about digital startups. She leads the Worker Tech program at the social investment house Bethnal Green Ventures, where she works to translate new ideas for the future of work into viable businesses and organizations. And I'm really happy to be able to bring in two colleagues from TUC affiliates. We've got Kate Dearden, the Head of Research Policy and External Affairs at Community, and Pakes, Deputy General Secretary at Prospect. And both their unions have got really interesting stories to tell about how they've been responding to in different ways to the challenges that are thrown up by the speed of digital change. So welcome to all three of you, and thanks very much for coming along. But before we hear from them, I'd like to say a little bit, please, about what we mean by digital disruption and why that is something which concerns us at the TUC. So I'll just start this off. Technology is transforming virtually every area of our economy and society, and digital has become the mainstream choice for day-to-day interactions now. 86% of British adults use the internet every day, and for the majority of adults of working age, it's the first channel they will turn to sort anything out. Mobile's made a huge difference too. Under 35s, everyone is an instinctive internet user, but they're also using it mobile throughout the day from wherever they are. This 2020 is the year that millennials, the people who came into the workforce after the turn of the millennium, start to make up more than half the UK workforce. And these are people whose whole working lives have been during the internet age. For them, new ways of working and new ways of running their lives are instinctive. They expect things to be immediate and to be always accessible. They expect things to be transparent and flexible with them in charge. And this huge potential base of users, coupled with an ease of starting new businesses, has meant an explosion in digital startup services. As new entrants have risen to market dominance in just a few years, and unions know all too well that Uber are atrocious corporate citizens, but they've gone from nothing to 3.5 million user accounts in London alone. And that's had a huge effect on incumbent organizations across the economy and society. So this lovely thing is the first self-contained digital camera, invented in 1975. What some of you might be surprised to learn is that it was invented by the world's largest film company, Kodak. But they didn't make use of it at the time because they couldn't see its place alongside their business model of selling and processing physical film. In retrospect, maybe they didn't ask the right question. They made what seemed like a really rational decision to focus on optimizing and selling more of their core product. But they didn't think about taking the opportunity of thinking about what change might mean to the whole nature of the business they were in, which really was about helping people tell stories to their friends. And Kodak did carry on. They kept growing. They peaked in '96, worth $28 billion. But by 2012, they were bankrupt. And one company that did find a new digital way to help users create and enjoy stories with each other is Instagram. As Kodak collapsed in 2012, Instagram and their 12 employees were being bought out by Facebook, and they now have 1 billion users a month. So One thing that's important to realise is that disruptive innovation is not necessarily about making good things better. It's about making things more accessible and more affordable. So if we're going to go back to Uber for a second, Uber got to 3.5 million users in London, not by competing with the gold standard of black cabs. They expanded the market to people that it hadn't been worth offering cabs to before. The lower price point and the transparency of access meant different people started using them who'd never dreamed of using a taxi before, and they just made that normal. And once they got that toehold in, they relentlessly moved upwards in the market, using the learning and their new reach to displace the competition. Anybody remember Blockbuster? Another big name that's often brought up in warnings about disruption. They were a huge established business when the founder of Netflix tried to sell them the fledgling company in 2001, and they turned him down. And at the time, Netflix was just taking website orders for DVDs and posting them out. They were serving people at lower margins than Blockbuster in areas that Blockbuster's brilliant infrastructure didn't cover, and they didn't see much of that. Blockbuster themselves, interestingly, had actually experimented with a digital service, but it was done on the edge of the company, separate from the core business. And the board members all came from the retail side and saw their own online trials as a threat that could cannibalize their high street sales. They just held back their own digital project rather than be open to where the radical change might take them. And a key lesson for organizations here, I think, is the need to learn to adapt to the changing expectations of your users, even if that means you may end up competing with yourself. So, question for us, if these trends are going to keep happening faster and faster to companies and organizations alike, how do we stop unions becoming the next Blockbusters? We might not always realize it, but the Netflixes are out there already. The ease of making new digital services means that we've got loads of our own disruptors, all of them working on different little bits of what the work that unions currently do. And more of them are popping up every week. Some of them are new products from old organizations. Some of them are totally new ideas. There were new platforms, new services, new campaign groups. They could be allies. Some of them are already good friends, or they could be rivals. They might amount to nothing, or they might change the game for everyone. Most of them are decent people doing good things, but at the same time, they aren't exactly unions. And why is that a risk? And how's that a risk? Why does it matter? Well, think from the perspective of a young worker in an industry with low union density. We know a huge number of them have never even heard of unions, and those that have haven't really considered as something relevant to their situation. If their expectations from any organization they want to work with are digital first, they're naturally going to reach for familiar ways of working when they have a problem. And here are two frames that we've found that come pretty naturally to them. One of them is the service desk. So digital's been a great enabler of customer service. Most of us are used to having our problems quickly and efficiently solved for us online by a combination of live chats, service tickets, chat box, knowledge banks. Advice services like CAB and ACAS are online, and they can tell people their rights at work in no time for free. Of course, as unions, we know that knowing your rights at work is only part of the battle. And there's way more that comes from standing together to protect your interests. And brilliant though it is, a service that only gives workers an individual and unenforceable half of the picture isn't going to help them to make change on any of the more systemic problems at work. Another frame is clicktivism. We sign all petitions online for all sorts of things. And when people face an injustice now, that's one of the first things that comes to their mind. Fits in perfectly with people's new expectations. You start your petition instantly, make it how you want it, you're in control every step, and it develops in ways that feel totally familiar to you. And the downside is that you most likely end up one of the 99% of petitions that gets ignored, or worse, gets you into trouble you hadn't expected and you've got no support for. So as unions, we know our ways of working are powerful. We know they're the best way to secure sustainable change, system change, where we work. But our ways take a lot of explaining to people who've seldom got the time or inclination to listen to us. And if workers instinctively feel that another way better fits the way they expect to work, then both they and our own members ultimately are standing to lose. When we think about changing the course of an institution like the TUC that's been around for over 100 years, it can feel like we're trying to turn a supertanker. And it's easy to get jealous of all these little speedboats that are zipping around us, doing really exciting things. And that may sound like I'm down on where we're standing as incumbents, but in this space, but far from it. both the new entrants and the incumbents have really different strengths and different risks, and neither of us gets an easy ride. For everything that they can do, we can do something else and have another strength. It's about, I think, learning how we understand our own strengths and make the best use of those. And one of my answers there is around behaviours. This is a photo of the side of my desk because I'm office sick at the moment, wanting to get back there. What are the ways that successful disruptors work? What are the ways that we can learn from without throwing the baby out with the bathwater? And that's things like being driven by data, listening closely to our members and our potential members, and taking small steps quickly and learning from them. There's a degree of culture change there that we'll need to do, but it's going to take us closer to the starting expectations of our prospective members. And other than that, there are loads of ways we can respond to the challenge. And all unions are going to have different opportunities here and different attitudes here. We've luckily got two approaches to hear from, with Kate and with Andrew. But before that, I'd like to bring in Cansu, who spends every day working around innovative new ideas at Bethnal Green Ventures. She can tell us a bit about their work program, working with many of these new entrants to the space, why Bethnal Green Ventures believes startups are a useful route to social change, and the kind of things that we might be able to learn from or partner with. So I'll get rid of these slides and hand over to you, Cansu.
Thank you, John. Thanks everyone for joining. And again, I think the slides sort of set up the scene for me quite perfectly. And actually your last slide with your little office picture sort of, you already gave away everything that I was going to talk about. But for those of you who are not familiar with Bethnal Green Ventures, we are Europe's leading early stage tech for good investor. And which means is what we do is we invest in companies that believe profit and purpose can go together, and we do that by investing across the board under three main quite wide themes, which is healthier lives, a sustainable planet, and a better society. So under that, the reason we believe early stage tech companies can make a difference is because we feel like the societal challenges that we're facing, this is from the climate crisis, the health crisis that we're currently in, aging population, social inequalities, are all areas where there is relatively low digital exploitation, and digital tools and services can scale rapidly and cheaply compared to other solutions that we might be able to come up with. So it's almost like chipping away at very big problems from different angles. And I think the slide where you had some of our portfolio companies as well, with quite a few different players in the scene working on different niches, that sort of summarizes our approach to it. And when to link it into our worker tech strand, obviously that comes under our A Better Society theme. And what we've done is, roughly 3 years ago, we started talking to Resolution Foundation, who have now recently launched Resolution Ventures, actually. Then we were joined by Accenture to come up with a way to work together to see whether we can encourage more entrepreneurs who are mission-driven to look into the future of workspace. We started off by basically doing quite a few small events where we were usually joined by really highly engaged small groups of people. And I know I met John at one of our events, actually, I think it was last year, where we discussed what could be done. And that we try and approach this from an understanding the problem perspective. And then when so far we've invested in 6 startups, and I can give you a very brief overview of each in a moment. But what we really want to see is we believe that social innovation is something, actually any sort of innovation cannot be done in a bubble. So we need to involve different stakeholders. That's why it's really important for me to be, talking to everyone on this panel, basically. But on the face of it, I'm a VC, I'm a venture capital investor. So that's the first is, building meaningful relationships. And I guess the second bit is really being user driven and understanding the problem before throwing, fully fledged solutions at it. So it's almost about, not deciding that, you're here and then the problem is here. So not the top-down approach, basically. So which means that you need to have a very iterative process as you're co-designing these solutions with your users and beneficiaries in mind. And I guess the final thing is your users and beneficiaries usually are not your customers. So you need to, we believe that because we believe in only in for-profit ventures, we need to see a compelling business case. And like, that's also my personal view. Like, I'm a pragmatist, and I think the only way social impact investment scene is going to grow is by making sure that we only invest in businesses that make sense, that can not only become self-sustaining, but that can also become like big players. So you necessarily need to keep in mind the big employers, for example, when you're working in the worker tech space, if you're trying to build a solution that will make sense for the workers as well. So that's my outlook, I guess. To give you an overview of the 6 companies that we've invested in, and we're hoping to, so we've actually closed the first phase of our worker tech partnership. So now Resolution Ventures and us, we're trying to see how we can build on what we've learned. And in the meanwhile, BGV is still looking to invest in more worker tech companies. So far, we've invested in Organise, who've seen massive growth in the last 3 months, 6-fold their user base. They went from 100K to 600 users. And I think that's like a really good testament of how I don't want to say desperate, but how keen people are to connect to each other to see how they can meaningfully make their voices heard. That's what Organise does, their platform for workplace, that makes workplace organization more intuitive and hopefully, you know, make people's voices being heard louder. We have labor exchange. I think maybe Kate can talk to their experience with working with them. We have Tendo, Upskill Me. Those two are usually around, you know, as one of the names suggests, upskilling workers so that they can advance in their careers and like take more ownership in their careers. Labor exchange is around more stable income through making sure that, you know, short-term gigs are more findable and, you know, meaningful, I guess. We have Worker Bird, which is around making sure that everyone's getting their fair wages. And we have Earwig, which is a review platform. So it started in a very specific niche because the founder comes from that niche. It's a review platform for construction workers, so that they can have, they know what sort of company that they would be potentially working for. And I want to also give a little shout out to Breakroom. I saw their logo. It's founded, it's co-founded by one of the co-founders of BGV, and they're doing great work in reviewing, making low-wage workers more aware of their potential working conditions, I guess.
I'll mute myself. Thank you, Cansu. That's really interesting. Yes, Breakthrough are an interesting one to be following as well, from outside your stable. I wanted just a quick question, if you'll be able to say a little bit more about how what's kind of driving the people who are building these things. What do these startups look like on the inside? The people who are coming to you, not necessarily what stage of development they're at of their ideas, because that's changed quite a lot in terms of the what you need now to start up a company, and is now quite a different environment to where it was 10 years ago.
Yeah, sure. So basically, the way our model works is that when we invest in companies, we put them through a 3-month acceleration program. And the idea is that we meet them when they are just about build something, what we call an MVP, most viable product, which is something basically quite simple that gets the job done, but it's definitely not done. And they are usually pre-revenue. The idea with our program is that it comes down to making sure that they're building something that they will be able to sell. So we tend to work with them as they go through their, you know, understanding their user base. But we don't, like, when they come to us, they will usually have already done some background research on it. And we do have so we invest in roughly 20 early stage companies every year. And we have a, you know, competitive application scheme, and we tend to favor people when we see that they are coming at it from that iterative mindset that I was talking about. So obviously we're not the only ones. So what we do is we invest and we take an equity stake in the company, and we then join their later rounds. And as a venture capital firm, the way our model works is that we invest in companies that will go on to raise more venture capital. That's the only way we can actually, make meaningful returns to our own investors. But that's not to say that that's the only way of establishing a startup. There are lots of equity-free programs that you can go through. Like you asked me to give you like a little insight into one of those companies. So maybe I can talk about Harrison's journey from Earwig. Harrison actually went through some equity-free support programs before joining BGV program itself. So he already had some of the foundations in place when we invested in him. And his motivation, obviously I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think he will be happy with me telling his story a little here. He's an artist, but to basically pay the bills, he's been working in construction for the last roughly 15 years of his life. So, and he really wanted to make the industry more transparent for people who were coming at it. So he was very, very driven, because it not only that was a problem he personally experienced, because he's done it for so long, he has great insight into those little friction points that people go through that makes a digital product actually work. As you solve more and more tiny friction points, then you actually tend to make the overall process more smooth. And that's what people will end up paying for, I guess. And the way his model works is that it's a bit like Glassdoor, I guess, that it will be actually the big companies that pay for it, whereas for the users, it's free. Which is, I believe, similar to the break room model. Like I don't want to misquote, but as far as I know, that's how they're working at the moment.
Thanks very much, Jan. So yeah, and Earwig is a really fascinating one to look at. If anybody finds their site and sees the video intro that Harrison's made, it's really a great case study of kind of how you can get an idea, build something and test it, and get to quite a lot of people with your idea, validate it, and then work out what you're going to do about it. He's worked out something that unions know well, which is in construction, this nature of fragmentation and umbrella companies isn't serving any part of the construction industry. Everybody's undercutting each other, and it doesn't work for the workers, the agencies, the employers, or at any stage in there. And being able to introduce transparency through that is hopefully a way to bring stability to the industry, mainly aimed from his perspective as a worker, but actually seeing it the way all the way through it. It's a really nice idea. Thank you very much for that, Cansu. That's really useful. We'll come back to you for questions afterwards. If anybody's got any questions they want to put in, Cansu, or to the panel in general, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and we'll save those up for the end. Kate Dearden, the Head of Research Policy and External Affairs at Community, is with us. She's going to talk to us a bit about how Community have approached this area, the new potential partners, the new potential ideas that they've come up against. So thank you, Cansu, and I'll transfer over to Kate.
Thanks, John and Cansu, and thank you everyone for joining us for the panel today for a really, really interesting and what I think exciting discussion for the union movement, and a really important one that we're having. So as John alluded to, I'm going to talk a bit about what we're experimenting with at Community and our approach to quite a changing environment. And Community is quite a great experience in not just challenging change, but managing it too, as part of our structure and history of our industries as a trade union. You know, at the moment, whether it's the rapid growth in self-employment, the growth of the gig economy, or the rise of automation, we know the world work is changing, we know our membership's changing, and we know that the union's got to change too. I know, I'm sure union colleagues will agree that growing parts of the workforce are extremely different to the way the labour market looked when trade unions were founded. You know, increasingly people are switching jobs, careers and sectors. New technology has facilitated growth of the gig economy, fundamentally changing the nature of work, and automation as well is becoming realised for many businesses. And for us in particular, that's required us to think differently about how we approach and represent workers and our members. And secondly, how we approach and work with employers, or actually no employer at all. so that we are relevant to the needs of modern workers and are constantly looking at who we can work with and how we can improve and better our offer for workers, and indeed our current membership. So I'm going to go through a bit about what we've tried experiencing and what our approach has been, where we've worked in partnerships with organisations that perhaps we wouldn't have in the past, and what else we've learned in order to stay resilient as a trade union. So I'll talk about two things. One about our work on self-employed workers, and secondly about a work in partnership with a platform called Labour Exchange, which Cansu already highlighted and alluded to, and happy to take any more questions as I go through or at the end. So to start, I'll take the self-employed, and just to put it in perspective, 5 million people in Britain are now self-employed, and it continues to grow, and it's soon to overtake that of the public sector. Now, important representation of the self-employed is absolutely not a new concept. In sectors such as journalism, broadcasting, the creative industries, unions for self-employed have a really long and proud tradition, particularly Bethnal and Andrew's Union of Prospect. But as the self-employed sector grows at a record pace in the wider economy, I think there are really growing concerns for us as trade unionists. The sector has absolutely no awareness of trade unions and what we can offer them, no connections with other workers in similar circumstances, and crucially, no way of fighting back when people try to take advantage of the labour. A lot of self-employed workers, particularly those who are low paid as well, are using platforms and apps to find work. So what is the relevance of us as trade unions and what can we do? There's plenty, I'm sure we all know it's been highlighted already by John, there's plenty of organising groups, both online and offline for the self-employed, there's association, there's bodies, and trade unions aren't really spoken about in this changing and rapidly emerging world of work. So we've looked at different ways how we can represent those workers, what services we provide and what representation we can provide as well. For example, we looked at working with a cooperative called IndieCube, which some of you may have heard of already, as to how we can introduce more co-working spaces for freelancers self-employed in cities and towns across the UK and bring them together as a collective. And then we've also looked at what we can directly offer as a trade union. It's still constantly adapting for us. It's things trying it out, what works, what doesn't work, as quite a new area for us as a trade union, and for this workforce in particular. So we're constantly reevaluating what we can offer and how we can engage this group of workers. But we know we have to make innovation work for these workers. We believe we can provide fair working conditions, that maintain principle for self-employed, that they are free to work as they please, and finding that balance. So we proudly now represent freelancers and independent workers in the UK, offering services and representation when and if they need it. Just to give you an example, our service centre that we have as a trade union that's traditionally for many years serviced many of our members in recognised and non-recognised workplaces, we use our service centre to chase late payments. And we found that 99% of the time clients pay up when they hear from the union. In the UK today, it's a massive issue for self-employed workers who are owed about £26 billion, and we want to get money back in their pockets and back into local economies. And I'm happy to talk about our offer further in Q&A if that's of interest, and there's more information on our website too. But it's just an example of how we are looking to approach, represent and speak to this massive group of workers that do need support and do need help in their work as well. And we've gone even further as a trade union in working with an independent platform called Labour Exchange. So this is again another way of us trialling about how we can work with different organisations to better build on our offering and help those in the labour market. So the platform seeks to link people with employers who need temporary workers. That's the basic premise of it. It's quite a unique platform that's supported by a trade union. And we've done that because we want to be part of a drive to improve the rights of flexible workers and avoid the unfair exploitation associated with gig economy platforms. So workers sign up to the platform and the app indicate their skills, and when they're available, that's I'll take you through the steps of what a worker would do. And then their employers contact them. They're guaranteed to be paid at least the living wage, so the living foundations rates, and is funded by business users who pay £10 per booking for the site, or £150 if they take the workers on the site permanently. The site also prevents employers from hiring the same person more than 3 times for a job. We're also constantly reviewing this and seeing if it does work. And we instead suggest that they offer the worker a permanent post. We found the platform creates a level playing field, so people and businesses can benefit too, especially those workers who are struggling for sufficient hours for their employers. or if they have caring responsibilities, particularly with women, and those who are desperate for work, because at the end of the day, that £20 a week, that extra £20 a week is the difference between putting food on the table or not. And for these workers, it's been an absolute lifeline to have that extra income and to know that they'll be paid on time, be paid fairly, and have a support of trade unions contact whenever they have issues or need further support in helping their work. Happy to talk about a bit more in the details as well afterwards, but I just thought to sum up and to give you a summary of where we are, and that, you know, I think, and community thinks that technological advancement, employment flexibility, they're all here to stay. I think that's the reality of the world that we're in. And to discount that will actually do harm to workers' rights in the long run. So how do we strive to change with the times? How do we continue to fight to stay relevant? What role can unions play in this changing world of work? And how can we encourage these new ideas, welcome different jobs and jobs of the future, and actually build partnerships with those we might have once ignored, but, you know, now need us more than ever, especially those workers. So thanks very much again, and looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much, Taylor. That was really, really interesting, and shows you guys as a union grappling with the really big changes that are happening in our economy, and how you manage your traditional membership and the possibilities of going forward there. So I'll move on to Andrew Pakes now, please. Andrew is the DGS at Pakes, and they also have a kind of perspective on where we learn from the behaviours that digital is starting to force into all of us, and take those into our existing unions. So over to you, Andrew.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, John. Look, I've just been really impressed by the previous two speakers. Yeah, I'm really pleased just to be a participant in this. So I will try and keep my comments relatively short so we can have a bit of discussion afterwards. I'm going to try and put a couple of slides up in a minute, just talk through some of the projects we've done. And really what I wanted to try and do is perhaps just share some of the thinking and approaches that we've undertaken as Prospect and our BEC2 sector about what change means to us and how we need to think about it. I say that because I won't say I'm an expert. I think we're on a journey. I think we've realised there are things we need to reflect on. And my starting point really, let me introduce myself again. I'm Andrew Pakes. I'm from Prospect and BEC2. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm going to talk about these couple of projects. My starting point is, though, always that, you know, unions historically have been the most successful disruptors in our economic model that the world has ever seen. And sometimes when we talk about the scary thing about change, how perceptions, public attitudes, work is changing, I think we sometimes forget about this. And when we've had internal conversations or conversations with activists, you know, I always say disruption may be a bit scary, it may be a bit different, but essentially it's about how we center ourselves on those values that we originally had. So none of this conversation about digital or new means of doing things is about moving away from what creating collective voice is about. But I think there are challenges about how we reflect on that, given our economic models changing, the means of production are changing, and all sorts of attitudes within that are being affected by lots of things. So let me see if I can put a couple of slides up to you, if that comes up. Is that on your screen, John?
If I was not muted, yes, I can tell you it is.
Great. So notwithstanding, you know, I think that this is about how we build the movement into this, you know, the new era we're in. We have got some challenges facing us. And the bit I'm really interested in this whole conversation is around not just episodic interventions. I'm less interested in, can we have a bit of software that allows someone to sign a petition? And I think petitions are really important parts of social change. The reason why I'm involved in trade unions and why I'm a union officer is that I fundamentally believe in the power of workers coming together to have a sustained voice in the issues that affect them about their work and the society around them. And to me, disruption and change is about how do we build that sustained power an agency. And I think that word agency is really important to me, because I think it fits the value set of a much bigger population, at least in the UK, than are union members at the moment. So why do I say winter's coming? I say winter's coming because the reality is, with economic change, if you're in the private sector, then you're much more likely not to be in a union than you are in a union. And I think some of those trends are going to continue. We need to double the recruitment of members aged just under 35 to replace the baby boomers and others who are coming up to retirement. I think that's a real big challenge. We also know the world of work is faster changing than we are. All the brilliant points that Kate made about, is our speed of change outpacing the change that's happening at work, and how do we build those together? And I just put a bit, I think actually it's interesting around how business is innovating, and we've got to change our tools and some of the ways we think about organising and bringing workers together, because the equation on the other side from employers is some of that's already happening, and we've seen that accelerated through the COVID crisis. Not going to speak about this slide, but just take a look on Google or your chosen search engine. Employers are investing in all sorts of creepy technology and others, and they are putting their money where their mouth is in terms of how they innovate in the equation of power at work. And I suppose my assertion is we've got to think about some of those things ourselves. So we undertook a branding project about 18 months ago, which looked at not just the colours we use on slides you're looking at now, but also began to look at some of those bigger questions of what does change mean to us? How do we build our membership in terms of giving people a voice in the organisation as well as in their workspaces? And we did some really fascinating focus groups. We got support from John, Antonio, and some of the TUC team around this. And the work we did, when we say young workers, we obviously mean young workers in the trade union mode, so 35 and under, as opposed to genuinely young. And 4 key messages came up there, which I think are instructive to us in how we begin to think about change. Firstly, and this was young workers who were not in a trade union, they didn't know who we were. They just simply didn't know what trade unions are. So one disruption we looked at is going back to basics in talking about tangible benefits and what we actually do, and not presuming people know or understand the iconography and language that we've created around unions. Secondly, they didn't think unions were for them. They thought maybe they're for their parents, or maybe they're for people in trouble. And we are there for both of those, but I don't think most people start their career thinking it's going to be a terrible thing. And actually we've got to connect into people who want to get on, as well as those who need to get even. Thirdly, they thought they'd do better on their own. They thought if there was a problem, why would they turn to an organisation like us? They'd ask their friends in the pub, or on Zoom probably now, and they would Google the answers or find some free to view information. Finally, they weren't aware of the individual benefits. So that kind of told us that despite the fact we're doing brilliant work, and just looking at the Organise festival that's going on now, it's hard not to see the brilliant work that lots of trade unions are doing. But if non-members don't know about that good work, then I think we have to question how some of that goes together. So we started to look at this premise, which is that it is down to us to be innovators of our own future. We don't have a preordained right to exist as organisations, and we have to go out there and earn that every single day, because we need people to choose to join us and choose to stay with us. So in terms of the tech, innovation, digital, we've begun to look at things such as these questions here. And the first one's really important to us. How do we do things differently, given we're in a different space now? And the second question after that, which isn't on the slide, is how do we stop doing things if they're not working? Because we can't do everything. And there's sometimes, I think, a trade union activist trend to just keep doing more and more. And at some point, we lose that balance of efficiency. So for us, things like we're a community of over 20,000 freelancers and self-employed people in Bet2 and our prospect sector. We've done things differently. We also do the bill chasing for self-employed and freelancers that can't get paid. It's quite low tech. We send letters, we follow up with employers, we help ensure members get paid. We also do things like public liability insurance and other service products. So trying to provide services to freelancers, but also bring that a collective spirit and create the collective voice within that. And that, those are our fastest growing areas for us as a trade union. And I think that's because we've put the time into working with members and rethinking what that offer is. Secondly, where are the jobs? Not just infill, but if you look at the fastest growing parts of the economy, in the tech industries, the gaming industries, they tend to be places in the private sector where unions are not strong. So how do we devote the resources to get into those places? I think in terms of disruption, the question of what are the new skills for members, activists and staff? Do we need people who can do our own coding? Do we need to work with people like Cansu more often? How do we create that open, porous kind of organization that allows us to think about data analysis, data assessment, how we use new tech skills and coding skills? What would be in, I suppose I'd say, the question we've been saying now, in 5 years' time, what would be the core competencies of a union officer in this modern world? And I think it's really interesting to perhaps lay that against some of the core competencies we've got now. And that's not to say jobs now aren't in the right space, but over time, we've got to get some of that change coming through. There's a really interesting fact or set of facts that I looked at in our branding project, and that is over half of trade union members have been in their jobs for 10 years or more. Nationally, the average is 5 years, but for the millennial generation, they tend to be in a job for 3 years or less. So we've got a current membership base who are in a relatively stable set of employment, notwithstanding COVID and the recession at the moment. Yet the new membership, the growth areas of younger generations is much more fluid. And I think some of this disruption is how we pivot our understanding to challenge and work with some of those. And I think, the question here we've got, we keep reflecting on is, often we ask the question, how can we succeed better? I think with innovation, we've got to ask the question, how can we fail better and not see failure as something that's wrong for us? I think we've got to, work with people like Cansu, people who are working on the edges of the traditional movement to understand how we can look at things and assess how those things work. And that's why my final point down is there, how can we be more movement generous? The projects I'm about to talk about very quickly in a moment have all succeeded because we've worked with other people in different unions around the world, but also with tech developers, with coders, with human rights lawyers, to look at the sense of how we bring that new product together with the value set that we've already got. So let me just quickly tell you about these two. I put the URLs at the bottom, you can see them. The first one is, we do a lot of campaigning on data rights, AI and automation. It led us to reflect that we shouldn't just be asking employers to do the right thing. We should also be ensuring that if data matters at work, that we as trade unions and activists are taking the data of our members seriously as well. So this week we've launched this Lighthouse, which is an interactive quiz and guide. We've made it open to any union that wishes to benefit or use it and to give us feedback so we can keep changing it, which is based on ICO guidance, trade union and campaigning best practice, to give branches and activists a checklist and set of quiz questions to go through so we can begin to address our own data and think about how we use that. Secondly is the launch this week of We Clock It, where we've been a UK union partner working with Uni Global Union, but also some absolutely brilliant human rights and tech developers on this new app, which is, you can check it out on Google Play or the App Store. It's kind of a Fitbit for workers, which is, we know these devices are incredibly powerful in terms of what they measure, but too often that data is being leached off without any permissions or rights for us. So we've been working as part of this coalition to develop We Clock It, which is essentially allows us to measure our own data as workers. All that data is held on the app. It is all owned by individual workers taking part, and it is only with their permission, if they choose to, with explicit consent, that they can share it with us as a union or whoever else is running the campaign. And what that means is we can build up more accurate data pictures around commute times. How long are we really working? How long are we checking our emails for work on our phones? Last thing before we go to bed, first thing in the morning. What about unpaid overtime? There's a huge set of power. And I say we've only just launched it as a beta app this week to try and build that. We tested it with a bunch of young workers to see how long young how long young people are traveling into London and big cities for, so we could measure that commute time that's already been built into people's pay. And what the pilot showed us, which is the same as the anecdotes had told us, but gave us the data set behind that, which is we know that many young people are commuting ever longer hours because of poor housing and the cost of housing, but equally they're beginning to work on that journey in, and that work isn't being paid for. It's just automatically being assumed by employers that this wraparound of the workday is suddenly the new normal for how people are working. So there's some of our projects. The reason we've done them is because we know we've got to change. I won't claim they are the best products. I think things, some of the ones around Worker Bird and Labour Exchange seem really incredible, powerful ideas that it's really worth all of us cross unions listening to community and listening to their developers to see how we could apply those lessons. But what our kind of projects have said to us is it's as much about the experience of working differently as it is about the actual product. And that's us. It's about how we open our minds to do things. And the honest answer is we're all busy. I don't know a single union organizer or official who is not answering the phone at all hours of the day, dealing with casework, picking up problems, whether it's bullying, whether it's COVID related, whether it's to do with discrimination at work. So there is always something to fill the day. I think our challenge is how do we reflect on creating the bandwidth for ourselves to do the innovation so that we can stay relevant for the future. And I think part of that answer is we need to involve people like Bethnal Green and others to challenge us and test us and be part of that, because unless we are the authors of that future, we're not going to have a great future. Done.
John, you're on mute.
John, you're still muted.
You look like you're having a very good conversation with yourself.
I'm just too modest. That's the problem. Thank you, everybody. I will say that all again. There were some really interesting presentations there, making really good theme all the way through that. Thank you. And they've thrown up a whole load of points that we could take further. If anybody's got a particular question they would like to put in, please stick it into the question box, and we will look at that. The first one we've got here is from Jen Thornton. Hi, Jen, nice to see you. She's done a lot of thinking about this one, and her question is quite long, but it's a valuable comment. There's often resistance to paying for digital products, tools, services. She doesn't think people are trying to avoid paying professionals, but sometimes doesn't realize the level of professional investment that a founder or creative has put into a digital tool and service. We're so used to getting everything for free these days, free in inverted commas. It's encouraging, she says, talking about Cansu's presentation, to hear about a model that values financial sustainability for startups in an activist space as well. So her question is, how can we encourage people, specifically unions, to really value digital better, to understand the value of it and consider it a budget line rather than things to attempt to get for free or to pay the minimum for? Is anybody keen to take this one on?
Do you want me to?
Yeah, if you want to jump in.
I think that's a really good question, Jen. I don't think we've got the balance right ourselves yet, but I think it comes from that, essentially, if we were an NGO, if we were a campaigning charity, we'd be much more advanced about thinking about our theory of change, talking about and reflecting on what is it we actually want to achieve, what are the blockages in that or barriers, and how are the means of bringing people together to affect that change. And I think if you start asking those kind of questions, then different forms of engagement become much more prominent in terms of how you bring people together and enable that power or agency to come through on people. Clearly, we will always and should do aim for getting collective recognition and recognition agreements and building a workspace and employer level. But increasingly, we've got members in the private sector where recognition isn't the building block for their involvement. It's about creating and using campaigns and sector-based things. You know, the work we've been doing around bullying, harassment, sexism runs across lots of different sectors. And so we've applied it industrially, but we've actually galvanized people around an issue. And when we've galvanized people around the issue, then actually digital becomes a means to do that, as opposed to just saying we need digital. I suppose it's trying to relate it to the purpose and demonstrate what is the best means of doing that. And you know, whereas 20 years ago we would put a leaflet together or a magazine and sent that out, I think there's other ways of doing things, and we've got to create that blend of how do we create that space where people can come together.
Lovely. Anyone else want to come in on that one?
Yeah, just to comment on the back of it, of what Andrew said, sort of maybe more practical things that at least we try to look at, and sort of seeing value for spend and enabling sort of the union to properly understand the impacts of investing in digital and really consider it as a key part of the union. And particularly during the pandemic, it's been really interesting, and it will be interesting to hear other unions' experiences as well. So sort of the way we've tried to engage with potential members, as well as our existing members, and how we retain that during a really, really difficult time in employment and financially. So how we engage with them differently, what events we're putting on, drop-in sessions, online drop-in sessions, the way we actually talk to people in our emails and online. So they are reading really important information and constantly, you know, the government updates and updates from their employer. How do we make sure that we engage with them properly, using all the facilities out there in digital, and learning from other organisations and seeing how they're doing it, and actually tracking, you know, how many people visited this page on our website when we tried this differently, how many people opened this email when we tried this differently, how many people are attending these online drop-in sessions, and you know, all these different ways, and actually tracking them to properly demonstrate the impact. And you know, it's evident for unions if the membership increases or not, or actually if they just get more engagement and feedback from members. So quite a basic level of evaluating, but I think a really important one when trying to encourage unions to invest in things that particularly the private sector does really, really well.
Totally would echo that, Kate. I think with the picture I showed of my desk is a kind of our 8 principles for digital development. One of those is to commit realistic resources. And whilst unions are not solely beholden to a bottom line, and we don't have the kind of many of the concerns of private sector organisations of the type that Cansu works with, there's still a lot that we can learn from their methods in how they evaluate whether what they're doing is right and on the right track, and working out what you count is, I think, a big part of that, and assigning a value to it. So do you know the average lifetime value of a member? How's that changing over time? You can then make decisions about, well, what type of engagements is it worth us trying to find new members to bring in to make our organizations viable. So whilst we don't reduce everything to the costs in it, when we start tying it to things that the union really, really cares about, then it helps us, I think, make the case for more stuff on that. Ironically, as digital has become more flexible, I think, and you've been able to do more for free or low cost, it's been kind of harder to make the case for a serious investment in it sometimes, rather than saying we need a new X, let's spend £50,000 building it and you can understand it. If you're saying we need a sliding project which we're going to prove as we go, and we don't know how much it's going to cost yet, but it will be worth it. it's a harder sell, and you need to be really good at communicating success and monitoring it properly. An interesting question from Joe, who has picked up on Andrew's point about unions being the original disruptors, and a lot of traditional union tactics in real life, picketing, boycotting, sabotage, disruption of capital production and distribution, to leverage that into better conditions are inherently disruptive. And how do we do that in tech? Do we have any interesting examples in how of doing that in a digital sense?
I can take that. I guess the first thing when I read the question, the first thing I thought about was reputation of employers. One thing that technology has made, I guess, easier is to basically be more vocal about our experiences and our opinions. And from my limited experience with working with Worker Tech Ventures, the model that we see is where the startups are able to draw attention to the working conditions in particular employers and sort of amplify that voice. So and that's one of the reasons their business model works as well. So I've already mentioned Glassdoor as an example, again, like following on from that thread. It's not only about, you know, ruining a reputation, but it's also having a good reputation as an employer for low-wage workers. And if you make that information available, similar to the way that Breakroom does, that if you know that you have options and you see those companies that you might want to go and work for ranked, then that gives you more power as a worker. So I guess that seems to me something that resonates well with both on the worker and the corporate side in a way, so that these companies can build sustainable business models. It's not the only way, but it's again, like, this is the thing that we've seen work quite well.
And anybody else? Like, we've got 2 minutes left of our session. Andrew, over to you.
Yeah, so look, I think one of the best platforms I've come across is a US one. It's called coworker.org. I think they're absolutely brilliant. They provide, and there's other platforms that do this. What I think the brilliance of Coworker is it creates organizing spaces online, so people can do the petitions, but things like Starbucks baristas can connect with each other and look at campaigns around things that matter to them. So it creates an online space for workers to come together, identify, have agency themselves over the issues, not just put a petition up and someone signs it. It builds a whole kind of ecosystem in it. But where I think Coworker go the extra mile is, you know, it is a pathway into union membership. And that matters to me, because rarely is an industrial issue actually the uniform or a bit of the working day. You know, it's rarely that working conditions are a single issue. They are part of a continuum of that relationship between managers, the employers and employees. And Coworker gives that platform. They do brilliant work on the ground. They do training, they do empowerment things. They work with some of the new startup unions in America, as well as providing the platform. And that's the space I'd really like to see this continuum being, you know, that gateway into taking control of your own life, but actually that then passport into, for those who want to, the ability to build your own autonomy in a sustained way.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Andrew. And on cue, we're at 2 o'clock. So time has gone really quickly. And I'd like to really put a lot of thanks to colleagues. Sorry to those we didn't get to answer this time. So thank you very much to Cansu from Bethnal Green Ventures, to Kate from Community, and Andrew from Prospect,